Sure do. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to ask this question. I'm going to tell you right now, this is probably going to be all over the place today. I would apologize for that, but God's got something for everybody here today. There's a lot going on in our world right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of unknown. And I just want to challenge you with this because it's set on my heart this week. As a Christian, does that concern immediately make you focus on the things going on in the world, or does it make you focus on Jesus' return? Because the answer to that question is critical. If we see things that appear that people may lose their life over, does that break our heart for the reason that Jesus has put us here on this earth? That some may die without knowing Jesus. And I tell you that because what we're going to talk about today, it's tough in and of itself, okay? And what I want to do today is I just want to kind of share some experiences that I've witnessed personally in my life. These experiences, these things that I've experienced, in no way is something that I hope this does not happen. I hope you don't say, I can't believe that would happen. I hope it just gives you some examples and opens your eyes and opens your heart to the seriousness of what Jesus has called us as followers of His to. Okay? When I first got into ministry, y'all, I was as green could be. And I tell y'all all the time about my dear friend William Moody. He was, if you know William, you know, he was probably the best mentor into this life. There's a guy, his name is Philip Sims. He was the preacher at high school when we were still there. And those two men kind of just took me under their wing to try to make me understand scripturally what it meant to be a minister. And I thank them, and I tell them that all the time. But when I first got into ministry, I had been at Southside for probably 3 months in Mineral Wells. And I met a friend, his name is Charles. And when I share this story with you, you're probably, if you don't understand why this Thanksgiving giveaway that we do here each year is so important to me, I want to give you a little insight as to why it's so important for me. This was my very first, I was the discipleship minister at Southside, and this is my first event really as the discipleship minister there. And my task, what the leadership wanted me to do, this was an event that was already going on there. We had participated in it when we had lived there earlier. But they wanted me to figure out how to make this more meaningful and to work better, smoother, with everybody involved. And it was already a pretty smooth operation. But what we were doing at that time is we were just having people, we even had to call the police department because 25th Avenue was there on where we were, and they would have to block off the road because so many people would show up to pick these up, okay? They would come in, they would pick up the bags, and then we had a loop through out there. And my friend Charles was the one that inspired me, as I said, to do the things that we currently do here. And that's what we ended up doing there, was instead of having them come to us, we went to them and met them where they were. And that was kind of the focus behind that. And I want you to know, I had no idea who Charles was at this point, okay? He was just a guy that showed up, and this was my very first encounter with Charles. And that wasn't supposed to be emotional. But I made that picture because I thought, this guy showed up on a lawnmower. Right? It was a really cold day that day. And Charles shows up driving this fairly nice lawnmower. And he used this lawnmower as a means of transportation and also a way to make a living. My path with Charles continued to cross over the following months because we were involved with the local food pantry there in Mineral Wells. And as time went on, I found out through conversations with some of my dear friends there that were kind of overseeing the food pantry that Charles had cancer. He wasn't able to go to all of his treatments in Fort Worth because he didn't have a vehicle. You know, a riding lawnmower will work in a town, right? But I dare you to get on one on I-20 going toward Fort Worth. So we talked about it, we prayed about it, and this small group of people decided we need to start taking it. So we set up a schedule. You know, that's what you do. You have a meeting, set up a schedule, make plans. And of course, it just seemed like as time went on, everybody else's plans were too busy. So I got to spend a lot of time with Charles in a car. We had some great conversations. And on those trips, you know what preachers do? They always try to sprinkle a little Jesus in everywhere you go, right? And those conversations over time, they got deeper and they got deeper. And we started talking about what happens when you die and the fear that he was facing from the diagnosis he had. And see, Charles said that he believed in Jesus. But he also said that he had some really, 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 really bad experiences at churches. And it was all based on who he was and what he had done in the past. He had lived in Mineral Wells his whole life. Everybody knew Charles' story. Over the next 6 months and now 3 years into ministry, Charles had called me one day because it had been really dry in Mineral Wells. Y'all don't understand anything else. You understand dry in this part of the world right now, right? But it had been really dry and his cancer was progressing. And so he just wasn't able to work as much as he used to. And so he called me and he asked me, he said, I'm out of food and I need some food. And this was on a Saturday afternoon. So I immediately ran to the store and I picked some things up. I took it to his house. And by this time we were close enough that I knew what he liked and what he didn't and what he would eat and what he wouldn't. And so I'd take it over to him and I told him, like I would often tell him, I said, Charles, I'd love to take you to lunch tomorrow. Of course, I have church, but I'd love to take you after church. And I said, that Sunday, I was supposed to actually preach that Sunday, and it was one of our, what we called their Just Jesus Sundays. And that's where we would go out into the community and do different projects. We would go to the local laundromat and take quarters and just feed quarters into the machines and share our testimonies with people about Jesus. The amazing thing about that whole deal is we always came back with more money than we took because there would be people there that was just so moved by what we were trying to do that they would give us money. So we got quarters once, and I don't think we ever had to get them again. Anyway, I told Charles that I was supposed to preach that Sunday, and he smirked and kind of looked at me, and he said, I can still hear him, and he said, You mean they really will give you a microphone and let you stand up in front of people there? Yeah. We both laugh too, because it still amazes me that I get to do this. I told him, I said, well, I'll come by and pick you up. Because he said he wanted to come. And I'm like, yeah, I'll come get you. He's like, no, don't worry about it. I'll get there. And I knew what that meant. We'd done this dance for 3 years. I mean, he wasn't going to show up. So, but as I had done many times before, I stood out in the foyer and I patiently waited and looked on Charles to show up. And lo and behold, coming around the corner, here comes that riding lawnmower. And so I'm standing at the door to greet him. I'm excited. And y'all, when he walks in, he has this look of terror that I don't know that I've ever seen on anybody's face before. And he is just profusely sweating. And I immediately thought, well, it must be the cancer. And I asked him, I said, Charles, are you okay? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, I just get really nervous in places like this. And I promised him it was going to be okay. And so I took him in. I said, just trust me. We walk in and about 3 or 4 rows toward the back is as far as I could get him to come. And he said, this will be good right here. And Trish and my kids were gone for something that Sunday. And so I said, well, I'll sit with you. And so we sat down where he wanted to sit. And I said, I've got to go up and do the welcome. And then I'll be right back. And he looked at me like he didn't really want me to do that, but okay. So I go up and I do my thing, and I come back where I'd left Charles when I'd gone up, and there was a couple, an older couple that was sitting there where I had left Charles. And Charles wasn't there. And I said, where's the guy that was sitting right here? And they kind of looked at me, I don't know what you're talking about. So I'm really confused the whole time I'm trying to give the lesson that I'd prepared. And as soon as I got through, I went and grabbed a bucket of chicken because that was Charles's favorite thing to eat. And I go to his house and I knock on the door and I said, Charles, what happened? And he told me, he said, Tim, I'm so thankful for your friendship. And I'm so thankful for what you do for me. But I will never go to another church ever again. I said, why, Charles? And he said, well, when you left me in that seat a few seconds later, an older couple came up and they kind of stood over me. And he said, so I looked up and I kind of grinned at them. And he said, they said, you're in my seat, you got to go. He said, so I did. I got up and I left. And I won't ever go to another church again. I just started crying. I said, Charles, please let me fix this. And he said something to me, y'all, that I will never in my life forget. He said, Tim, I love you. And I'm thankful for you. And I want you to know, because you ask me all the time, I love Jesus too. But I don't like Christians. And I don't like Christians because they are so unlike Christ. And I wanted to tell him, Charles, that's not true. But you see, at that point, from the experiences that he had lived all of his life, I couldn't tell him that. And I saw Charles one last time after this happened. It was about 2 months later. And we visited for a second, but it wasn't the same. And after that visit, 2 weeks later, He died without giving his life to Jesus from cancer. And that memory reminded me of a story in John chapter 8 that I want to share with you today. We read about Jesus teaching in a courtyard one morning, and his teaching's interrupted by this angry mob made up of these religious leaders of the day. And being pushed out into the open by this mob is this woman. And she may have only been dressed in a bed sheet at that point. And as she shoved out into the dirt and the ground in front of Jesus, one of the religious leaders gives Jesus the accusation and says, "We found this woman in bed with another man who's not her husband. And the law says to stone her. So what do you say, Jesus?" And this was a really bold and pushy move by the religious leaders of that day, because they were trying to use the rules to trap Jesus. And rules can often be that way for us too. Rules can kind of turn us into angry mobs at times also. And sure, we might not ever form together and parade a sinner out into the middle of town, but we will huddle together and whisper somebody's name, won't we? And what I hope that we all understand from today is that God's Word provides both guidance and commandments. And those commandments, those laws are there to protect us. But if we're honest, we know that there's not one of us that can follow those laws perfectly. Because every one of us has fallen short of the glory of God. That's the whole reason Jesus had to come. Some have fallen more in public settings and others more in private ones. But church, when we just overemphasize the rules, we can get people thinking that we've somehow got it all figured out. And when we get people thinking they shouldn't share their struggles with us, we need to address that. Sometimes Christians tend to be a lot more like the Pharisees and the religious leaders than like our Messiah. And they end up using the rules to rationalize how they treat others, especially newcomers, or those whose sins might be more difficult to understand, might be more difficult for them to hide. And I want you to know this happens a lot of times completely unintentionally, because Christians often do mean well. And we'll say things like, well, we're just trying to keep the standard high. We want to maintain a certain level of excellence. But church, when we just focus on that, we also make it really, really hard for people who have not come to Jesus to come to Jesus. Because to the outsider, what they think, and what we don't realize being an insider a lot of times, is what they think is when you want to come to God, then you got to follow all these rules. And we've established all these rules just to make sure only the people that are really serious about it are the ones that get in. But in the end, those well-meaning believers will end up creating a list of rules that will just completely wear out and frustrate new believers. And here's the first thing I want us to talk about today. Rules can be cumbersome. When I was in college, I had a friend. I was through playing tennis and I was trying to finish up school, and I had this friend who was the head basketball coach at a private Christian school, and it was right down the road from where I was living at the time. And I kind of became her assistant coach at this Christian school, and I'd help with practices from time to time. Also did some substitute teaching way back then when I didn't know better. That's what I thought I wanted to do with my life. Uh, the one thing I remember about this school is it had a lot of rules. And I know they have every right to have those rules, okay? And I think it's great for schools or for homes to make some of these rules. I don't have a problem with it. I'm just stating the fact. There was a lot of them. Like, you couldn't have your hair below your collar if you were a boy. And girls' skirts couldn't be more than a couple of inches above their knee. And they actually had one person who that was their only job. And they walked around with a ruler all day, every day, measuring. I'm not making that up. That really happened. You also had to be clean shaven. I was helping with the junior high one day, and there was a 13-year-old boy one day that got sent home from school because his peach fuzz was too thick. There were all kinds of rules, and they were very closely followed and monitored. And again, I want you to know it's fine for schools and families to have those rules, but here's what happened for a lot of those kids that went to that school, because I would see them at our college after they left the school. They quickly associated all those rules not with going to school, but with being a Christian. Somehow, many of them got this message that these rules, you got to follow them all if you're really going to be a Christian. And they graduated from high school, and many of them, if not most of them, completely walked away. They were so tired. They were exhausted from trying to keep all these rules at school and then at home. And again, I want you to know rules are fine. But the problem is they had somehow gotten the idea from all of these rules that that was what was following Jesus was about. That's what it meant to be a Christian. This woman in John 8, she shows up and she's looking down and she is completely humiliated. She knows that she's guilty and she is completely ashamed. Because you see, she's been caught breaking the rules. And she knows that this may be the very day that breaking the rules cost her her life. And Jesus kneels down and he begins to write something in the dirt. And we don't know really what he was writing, but these religious leaders are standing around and they are waiting for Jesus to say something. And they know, they feel this sense of pride, I am sure, within them, because they have finally caught Jesus by surprise. And they are really ready to hear him finally submit to this letter of the law. So they are all waiting for him to just kind of shrug his shoulders and say, well, you know, those are the rules. So Jesus finally looks up at these spiritual, elite, religious leaders of the day. And in John 8, verse 7, it says, when they persisted in questioning him, he stood up and he said to them, the one without sin among you should be the first to throw a stone at her. Then he stooped down again and continued writing on the ground. And when they heard this, they left one by one, starting with the older men. Only he was left with the woman in the center. When Jesus stood up, he said to her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? Can you hear her? No one, Lord. Neither do I condemn you, said Jesus. Go, and from now on, sin no more. Rules also don't inspire grace. During my junior year of college, I was I was taking the hardest class I'd ever taken in college, anatomy and physiology. And it was hard. And we had this Christian man that was teaching this class that played football at LSU, and it was a class full of athletes except maybe 4 or 5 people. And we're all getting close to graduation, and we ask him weekly why he had to make this class so hard. And he did something really unusual for our final. He taught me a lesson in God's grace that I'll never forget. I was terrified of this final. So we go in, it's at 8 o'clock in the morning, and he hands out the 32-page final test to each one of us. He didn't actually hand it to us. He walked by us, and he took the test, and it sounded like a book. He just kind of dropped it on our desk. Face down. He said, do not turn this over until everyone's received the test. When everybody got one, we turned it over, and he said, all I want you to do at this point is write your name on the test. On the first page, it had a place for our names and one question. That question said, draw, label, and define the entire skeleton system. I was in trouble. He gave us enough time to write our names down and then read the first question. And then he said this, before you write anything else down, I want you to read through the entire test. And so we did, and on the last question on the back page, page 32, the last question said this: you can try and get an A if you want to by taking this test, or you can just put your name on it and automatically receive an A on this test. I was the first one out of there. I immediately got up and signed my name, and people that hadn't read all the way through it yet, they were looking at me, and what did they do? They immediately went to the back page to see how the story ended, right? There's this one girl in the class. You know, you've always got that one girl in the class. And she got really, really upset because she had spent so much time studying. And she thought, what kind of teacher gives an A for not doing anything? So she stayed and she took the test on principle. She thought if she's going to get an A, she was going to earn it. That's what fans of Jesus say as well. I'm not taking any handouts because I can do this on my own. So as fans, they spend all their time in their lives carrying around all this burden that religion places on them. But church, the grace of Jesus, that same grace that saved this woman from being stoned, calls to all of those who have been hauling around all this long list of rules and rituals and obligations for so long. Jesus calls to those who are so tired of pretending to be more than they are. He calls to all those who have had all this guilt and all this fear of religion wear them down, and Jesus says this to them. In Matthew 11:28, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And maybe you grew up in a home where you were taught about Jesus. And you went to church every weekend. And you even went to church camp in the summer. And you learned to fear Jesus. And because of that, you kept as many rules as you could possibly keep. And you kept those rules hoping that you wouldn't go to hell. And when you would sin, you would feel this overwhelming guilt, wondering if you'd be good enough. And you were taught to observe all these different religious traditions and rule keepings, but somehow you got so focused on the rules that you never fell in love with Jesus. And over time, you became a fan of Jesus. Because when you come into a situation in which rules take precedence over love and grace, it's really hard to fall in love, isn't it? Think about it this way. When I got married, I was a little older in life, but I had absolutely no idea what it meant. And there were some rules that I said I would live by on the day that I got married. And what I found out is some of them are written and some of them are unwritten. But I understood that when I said I do, that I would be faithful, that I would provide for Trish, and I would be committed to her, for better or worse. But there were also some other rules that I didn't really know about on that day that have since been established in our marriage, like I need to be quiet on Saturday morning until at least 9 a.m., and that means don't rattle the cereal box bag or bang the cups around, or just be quiet till at least 9. Here's one: if you're newly married, you also need to pick up your own socks. I didn't know that. My mom always picked up my socks. And this one, if you have a cup and you're drinking from that cup, it is your responsibility to carry it to the kitchen. After about 35 cups piled up one day, I figured out, oh, maybe I'm supposed to do that. But church, if I just saw our marriage and our relationship as just a bunch of rules that I had to keep, you wouldn't be very happy in marriage, would you? Because I love my wife with all my heart. And I find joy in trying to be a good husband, even though I fail a lot. And I would do absolutely anything in the world for her. And so when I do the dishes, or I clean up after myself, or some other extravagant work of service and sacrifice, yeah, those are huge to guys and ladies if you don't know that. But when we do that, we find joy in those things, at least most of the time, because after all, we are men. Finally today, and most importantly, rules don't keep us around. And I want to make sure that I say this very carefully, but also very clearly. This was the first thing we focused on when I took the youth group here nearly 6, 7, however long it's been. When our kids grow up, and the only way that they define Christianity is keeping a moral code, instead of defining Christianity as being a follower of Jesus Christ, then they will walk away from both. And I know we think, I know, I'm a parent too, I know we think, but I got to make sure that they understand all these rules and all these moral obligations of being a Christian, and that's true. Church, I'm telling you, if the only way that they define Christianity is that way, instead of defining Christianity as being a follower of Jesus, they'll walk away from both. And I see it all the time. They will not only walk away from the moral code, but they'll walk away from Jesus too. So we as Christians must always correctly define Christianity first and foremost as following Jesus. We cannot, church, we cannot, no longer we cannot expect or think that the world around us is going to follow a set of standards that we would never live by ourselves or follow ourselves if we did not have a love relationship with our Savior. They're not going to get on board with that. So it always must be first and foremost about following Jesus. And I don't know all of your stories today. I don't know what your story is. I don't know if your story was like my friend Charles, where there was Christians who bullied you at every church you ever went to your entire life, or someone completely misrepresented Jesus Christ to you, or someone that you knew that you thought was like Jesus wasn't anything like Jesus at all. I don't know if it was a church that taught you a lot of traditions and a lot of rules and a lot of regulations that they all said was a must, but if you never got around, but then you never really got around to studying the gospel of Jesus in Scripture. I don't know if you grew up with some kind of religious affiliation where nobody ever seemed to make a big deal about grace at all, but they sure did make you feel guilty every weekend. I don't know. But here's what I do know. And it's true no matter what your story is today. We as followers of Jesus and not fans of Jesus desperately love for you to come and for you to experience the freedom that's only found in Jesus. But the question is yours. The question is yours. And are we going to fail? And are we going to fall short? And are we going to do some really stupid stuff as church people? Probably. But we're going to strive to follow Jesus in each and everything that we do, no matter what. No matter who, no matter where. That's our focus until he comes again or takes us home. So if you're here today and you need to come to Jesus, he offers that invitation to you as we stand and sing.